let's get started. So why are we here? I mean, what is the underlying theme here? It's that you have superpowers, you're all communicators. And that superpower is absolutely essential now and in the future. But given the times we're living in, the ability to influence, to persuade, to inspire confidence, to win people over to your point of view, to build community, to instill cooperation and collaboration. All of those C words are what is in you. And what's particularly important is that it's all of you. It's not just skills that you do in a part of your brain. It's not a technical, it's not a mechanical function. What we want to talk about is all of you, the inside and the outside, the acquired skills plus the emotional skills, the attitude, because I think particularly, and I know Dave, you're still here, but we're women here, and we particularly have innately, genetically, a higher degree of built-in compassion, right? And we have I guess more of a bandwidth, right, for giving. So I think with all that we have extraordinary superpowers. Let's see how we can put them to use in our respective areas. No matter whether you are working with the media or you are working with clients in a legal context, or you're working with cancer patients, everything you do, it speaks to your superpower as a connector. So it's, and what we're going to be talking about here today is just scratching the surface. So what are we going to be talking about? And we're going to be, actually, what we're going to be doing in the next close to 2 hours is all of the curriculum for a master class, all compressed into a 2-hour session. So let me you to where we go next. Here we go. I have to, by the way, I apologize in advance. I have this sort of I love Zoom, but Zoom advancing slides and sharing screens I have to master that. So I may falter just a little bit. What we're going to talk about today, boot camp agenda. So we're going to talk first about crisis. Obviously, we are still, even though we're phasing back into some kind of return to the familiar, I hate to use the term normal, what we anticipate being familiar is we're still phasing in. So there's a long way to go in terms of going back to any kind of normalcy. We're looking at COVID-19 best practices. The playbook doesn't exist. This hasn't happened to us in our lifetime. The last pandemic of this magnitude was in 1918, and all that was available was typewriter, right, and handwritten ledgers. So we are really in a time when we are sort of creating the rule book and best practices as we go along. And we're going to talk about some case studies, and I'm going to share some of the crisis cases that I had the opportunity to work on. We're going to talk about presence, okay? All of you, okay? Your voice, body gestures, eye contact, all the work together to support your message, to make your message really be compelling, to build that confidence and rapport with the people you are communicating with. And we're going to talk a little bit about colors, because there's not that much about color theory and color application. And all that I just discussed about presence is particularly relevant in this rectangular box that we live in now. It is now even more crucial to work with the vocal quality, with gesturing, with the way you convey your energy, your essence in this virtual space. As a matter of fact, today I was going to wear something that was blue, but when I did a test, it came out black. So I'm going through my closet and saying, what solid color do I have that will hold up and be true and be accurate in its projection, its representation on the screen? And it's very interesting. When you start to play with colors, you see that green comes out black or blue, and it's quite how the webcam interprets colors. The mindset, and we're going to enlist Elaine's help on that. What is the attitude? What is your enthusiasm meter? What is your intention? What is that personal energy that you bring to your contact with others? We're going to talk about the mindfulness practice and how valuable it is to make sure that you bring your best self to the stage or to any interaction. We're going to talk a little bit about presenting. Obviously, presentations are very important in a virtual space, more so now than before. We're going to talk about how to take the stage, about some of the basics of memorable presentations, and we're going to brainstorm a little bit about what our own experiences have been in terms of what constitutes a successful virtual meeting. And then we're going to end with an exercise where I want to engage you in some breakouts. We're going to be talking about your story. The power of stories is absolutely fundamental in any aspect of communication. Without the story, there's no glue. There's actually this just sort of ether. It doesn't really take root. It doesn't have meaning. It doesn't have dimension. And so we're going to talk about the transformative power of stories, and we're going to talk about you, because I'm going to give you a simple exercise that you're going to do in breakouts, and then with the others in 60 seconds, which is the story of you. And I would press to that anyone does not know the story of you, so it should be an easy one. So if we can just dive into, and please, if anyone has a question, please just speak up, and we'll talk about, we'll address your question right at that moment. So about crisis conversations? I don't like to call it crisis communication, because it should really be a conversation, right? It should be a conversation with stakeholders, with employees, with customers, with clients, with investors, with, you know, all of you know about the multiple stakeholders with whom you deal on a daily basis, with different hierarchies of importance, right? So we're leading and communicating and living through, you know, this pandemic. Everything we talk today, by the way, has very exact and relevance and value for our personal lives, right? Because we don't just communicate in our workplaces, we communicate in our daily lives. And in our home setting, this becomes particularly important, particularly when we're going through a difficult time. So what I want to impress on you is that we're not exempt from crises. It's inherent in being alive. Basically, everybody in every organization will be at the receiving end of an event, a turnaround, a traumatic thing, an event that risks your reputation, that risks your existence. And Anthony Robbins, I like this quote, because I talk about the crisis being a moment of decision. It's not so much opportunity, but it's what you decide to do next that counts. And he said, it's in your moment of decision that your destiny is shaped. And we have so much historical reference to that being the case, you know, as long as we have been on this earth. I'm sure we all know, it's in case studies, it's in textbooks, they're probably the worst documented in our lifetime, the worst crisis. Question?
It's okay.
I'm sorry, I thought I heard a question. So to continue, so what's considered the worst crisis ever, in fact, the worst environmental crisis ever, is the BP oil spill, which was in 2010. It happened in the Gulf of Mexico. It involved a rig that was a subcontractor. It exploded. 11 people died. There was oil and methane gas pouring, you know, in millions of gallons in the ocean for 87 days. BP, British Petroleum, was the company responsible, and it was blamed. I mean, there was no question that they were the ones who were to show their face and respond to the situation, which was tragic. In fact, there are still repercussions of this oil spill that affect the ecosystem in the Gulf of Mexico. So what happened to make this such a debacle? There was a disastrous response. You might have seen the CEO of the time, Tony Hayward, who sort of showed up on the scene very nonchalant, very cavalier, like he really didn't want to be there. He took the private jet. He got there 12 hours late. In the meantime, there was really no statement by BP. He made himself scarce when he landed. He sort of diminished the negative impact of the crisis by saying, well, you know, the Gulf of Mexico is a very big ocean. If I'd been working for BP, I think I would have had a seizure. He said many, including the one that's down below, which is, I want my life back. He was in such demand, and he was so much, you know, under the magnifying glass that he just felt like his life had been taken from him, and he said it. So unfortunately, he was ill-equipped to take the reins of the CEO, particularly in this situation. He blamed the rig owners. He blamed just about everybody else but BP. Consequently, the company had to pay more than $62 billion in fines, plus many billions of dollars more in cleanup costs, and the stock took a dive. So we know here, this is a dramatic example of the consequences. Now, we're using the Zoom platform, and very recently, Zoom had, as I'm sure we all know, a number of situations that included security breaches that had to do with the New York City school system, Zoom bombing, where people were showing up in private chats and sort of doing indecent things, and on and on and on. They basically grew very, very quickly. They never anticipated. They could not have anticipated the scaling, in a phased way, given what happened with COVID. So Eric Yuan got up to the media when he, and I love the virtual backdrop that they created, the heart of the in the shape of the globe, and we care about all of you. He was very humble. He said, we care, we made a mistake. We fell short, we took action quickly. We're learning lessons, and we're stepping back to see what we can do better. So this was a very sincere, I know that there's still issues going on, but he was right up there. He personally put himself out there in his Chinese accented English, and he just basically took control and took responsibility. It was actually, to me, one of the best examples of actually jumping into the thick of things very quickly. So what happens is people need to feel you care. They're in pain. There are pain points. There are people who are hurting. Obviously, there's 100,000 people who have died of COVID-19, right? And many millions of more who have suffered the side effects, the extended prolongedness, and many more, unfortunately, still to come. So people are in pain. What do they expect organizations to do? To say that you care, to feel a sense of connection. I feel your pain. It's not about BP, it's not about Zoom, it's about the pain that you're feeling. It's about how we can help you solve, alleviate, ameliorate the pain you're feeling. How can we be of service to you? How can we be a partner? How can we give you that embrace, even if it's not physical? It can be virtual, it can be in many other ways. How can we make your life better, right? And to do it with sincerity, do it with actions that match the words, to be consistent over the period of time that this is relevant, and to match your values, right? To really live by your values. If you say that people are paramount to our operation, live by that. If you say the health and safety of our employees is primary on our priority list, live by it, act on it. And we all know, we all work for, well, many of us work for large companies or have clients who have global presence, and you know that the code of ethics and the corporate values very much states what drives these companies. So obviously what we saw with Tony Hayward and BP is silence is not golden. You do not want to be silent. You do not want to crawl under a rock. You do not want to disappear from view. You have to be there. You have to show your face. You have to say, hey, we're here. How can we fix it? How can we work with you? How can we apply our resources, our talents, our expertise to help you make this better? Not doing it is seen as an affirmation of guilt. You're running from your responsibility. You're being seen as indifferent. You're allowing your critics to attack you. And in the age of Twitter and other social media, it is going to be lightning. It's going to be lightning bolts just trying to shake your foundations. You have to acknowledge the problem. You have to own it. You have to own up to it. The first move advantage. So it goes to who makes the first statement, right? The first out of the gate controls the narrative. If you don't do it, your competitor is going to do it. If you don't do it, the negative press is going to do it. If you don't do it, then our regulators are going to do it. If you don't do it, then your irate employees are going to do it. So you have to do it first. The golden hour crisis response, which is a term that comes from medicine, which is the golden hour is the time when a patient in emergency has to be triaged so that the life is not lost. So it's that very precious time when everything has to be calibrated and put into effect. So the golden hour crisis response is as soon as possible, within seconds or within minutes. Sometimes you have the luxury of having a multi-day window, but not until you have said, we see it, we acknowledge it, it happened, we're looking into it, we're trying to find the answers, right? You're not going to not make any statements. You're going to come back and do a phased or multi-stage sort of unveiling of things as you find them out, and as you determine what the best course of action is. The longer it takes, the worse it's going to be for you. So these are sort of basic, it's sort of the underpinnings of good crisis management and good crisis communication. Now we're in COVID. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the first global pandemic of the digital age. So we're in totally uncharted waters, right? So it's human, it's operational, it's financial, it's disruption, emotional, psychological. It's not a marketing opportunity, and any company that has tried to capitalize on this has had their wrist slapped, right? Whether it be selling masks for a premium, or testing kits, or what have you, or hoarding hand sanitizer. We've all seen those stories, and there are many more that we could talk about, because it's unfortunately human nature to try to take advantage of people in need. This is the critical time to gain trust, strengthen the bonds, and strengthen relationships. You know, it requires you to be really agile, so you can pivot, you know, into a phase of going from the unfamiliar to the familiar. Now we're in many parts of the country going into a phase 1. And possibly there'll be a phase 2 sometime in the summer. You have to roll with the punches and make sure that you are keeping lockstep with those moments when you have to communicate accordingly. And obviously what leaders do immediately after a crisis will determine, again, I can't say this enough times, you will thrive or die, right? Now, there are, and this is an important point about COVID, you know, because there's really 3 types of crises. We saw one with the BP oil spill, where you have a role in it, right? Something you did, something you owned, had a causal role in the crisis, in the disaster, right? So it's something where you have a piece of it. That's number one. The second one is where it's an act of nature. And those of us who live in areas that are vulnerable to tornadoes, to earthquakes, and to hurricanes, we know that it's an active, you know, it's something that happens every year, and we have prepared. Obviously, we don't know how much damage and how much into life and work will be an outcome, will result from it. But the things that we pretty much have drills in place, continuity model that we follow and rehearse during the course of, you sort of have a little bit of a step into, right? A little bit of a jump start. But then there's an act of God for which there is no preparation, which is what the coronavirus has brought us, right? So there are 3 scenarios where there is no playbook. We can, of course, take lessons from basics that I just discussed, but we are writing the playbook now. It'll be really interesting to see where we net out in a year or so. I think this is going to be a time of great learning for us as a profession. So this is what, so far, and I've done a combing through of some reports and some resources from the Public Relations Society. A number of agencies have done some social listening on what is off tone, what resonates, to try to create a little bit of a list of best practices during a pandemic, right? So we already know: act quickly, acknowledge the problem, enlist your employees for solutions. The employees are often overlooked as an extraordinary resource for figuring it out. You know, we can't sell a product in our bakeries. We can't sell bread. How do we get our product to our loyal customers, right? How do we continue to provide services in physical therapy? How do we continue to do yoga classes? All of this, your best sources, besides, of course, in your customers as well and your clients, your employees. Make people first, right? Put the human element before anything else. So it's basically, you know, I have in the right-hand column, shift from we to you. Make it about you. Use you statements. It's not about we. Don't start an email that says we are doing the best we can. It might start better. You are, and we're here to help you. You are important to us. Wonderful exercises be done to look at and do an analysis of your existing communications and to see how to improve some of these we use much more and inhuman to the people you serve. So come together with competitors. What's to say in the case of you're not come together with other bakers, together a plan that lifts all boats. So you're basically joining forces during an extraordinary time so that everyone can be right. You have to stick by values, don't sell, help. You know, you can create a war room. And by that, I mean, not if you have the opportunity to do or the means to do a physical war room, create a place where you have a repository of information, where you have your assets, you have your product photos, you have your statements, your press releases, you have your email sequence, you have your social posts, your calendar for platforms, you have tidbits of information that you are now putting into an arsenal, right, that will constitute your assets to respond and to act. Over communicate, communicate. More is not want to hear from you anymore, but consistently. Honesty, building trust. Again, don't blame, share praise, share. I mean, we're very quick to praise all of the frontline workers, but there's many other heroes who may not have gotten their due as yet. Or you care, simple language. If you work in a business that has a lot of corporate speak or a lot of technical jargon, try to minimize that at this time. Speak to the common denominator, what all will understand. Think about it as, you know, what would your 80-year-old grandmother, unless she's a PhD, what would your 80-year-old grandmother or what 8-year-old son understand? Plan for the long term, even if you don't know what's coming. We don't know when this is going to be over. But keep your horizon long and always think of what can I save, what can I repurpose should we, God forbid, be in another situation like this one. So with that, I want to open it up for discussion because then I wanted to share some case studies that I've had a hand in some way or another. I wanted to get your feedback on what I just discussed. How does it relate to what you're doing? Does it make sense? It was just something obvious that maybe was not included. Again, we're writing the playbook right now, so any contributions make a difference.
I'll pipe up to start, Rosemary. Among your last list on the last slide that you showed, the one that spoke to me was engage the employees for ideas and suggestions. Yeah. I remember when I worked in medical center where I was doing bedside nursing. And even though we had unit meetings where there was lots of discussion, there typically wasn't enough time to actually make real contributory remarks and aim at creative problem solving. And you and I both were at an event last October where it was mentioned this open space technology, a format for getting employees together to actually equalize the participation and have everybody feel that no matter what level you're at within an organization, you do have things to contribute. And so I'm hoping in the days ahead, I actually see more of that emerging in organizations. And it's actually a skill set that I'm looking to build as a facilitator and coach.
Very good.
This is Charlotte.
Yes, Charlotte.
Episkaya. I was going to comment on the same thing. We're a smaller staff. We're 80 people total. So it's very much starts with the staff in discussion of how we progress through this. And one of the other things that I find is that like for teams that are, you know, larger, my team's too, but the internal teams that are larger, some people don't speak up to their supervisors. So I honestly, when I'm there, I go around and I talk to different people in different departments that are on the front line, and I ask them, you know, how's it going? And I mean, find out all kinds of stuff that they wouldn't tell their supervisor that they'll tell somebody else. And then I never like rat anybody out, but I share the information that I know.
Yes. B, you mentioned obviously your role is media relations, but I would suggest that the media at this point in time could be real allies. They could really, because they know the industry so well, they know your business so well, that they could be enlisted as contributors and collaborators as well. So it might reframe the way that companies relate to the media that covers them on a day-to-day basis. So any other comments about, B, did you want to weigh in on that?
I do agree that the media can be an ally, and what we've been trying to do is early on, we tried focusing some of that media attention on what some of the efforts of our employees to help out where we can. We were deemed an essential business, so we never shut down. So we were working, and we tried to focus on some of the shipments that we were facilitating, say for, you know, personal protective equipment or other healthcare supplies that were needed. Really, and try to mention as well, or celebrate what our employees on the front line were doing. Though not my particular area, but our internal communications team has been working very aggressively, especially our CEOs for a couple of our business units. They have been trying to be present for employees as well in terms of communicating a lot by video. Those who are even shy have mastered it, or at least are working at it. And so they've been trying to communicate at least once a week, twice sometimes early on. You know, they wanted to be seen by their employees. They used to like to travel to our facilities, but obviously that's not possible now. So they've been trying to communicate with the tools they've got at hand at this stage.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else before we move on? Because I wanted to share a couple of situations that I was involved in, and I'll make it very quick. In the last boot camp, I was asked to share some actual experiences, and here goes. These were, as anyone who's been involved in crises knows, that there are some things you can't talk about, particularly those of you who are attorneys. Some things you can't talk about, particularly things that have to do with labor, employee performance. And then there are others that are never deployed. So in other words, they're actually taken in a preventive manner. Certainly the best crisis is the best crisis plan is the one you never have to implement, right? So you want to say, well, I'm glad the storm didn't come, but we were prepared if it had impacted us. There's a lot of things that can't really be shared, and some things that never make the light of day because the event didn't happen. So I'm just quickly going to share two case studies with you. One has to do with, and this was one that was quite involved and very long in duration. This was before the iPhone. This was probably between 2001 2005. I was head of America's public relations for Sony Ericsson, and there were many studies that had been made public by some reputable medical journals that found a correlation between the use of mobile phones and brain cancer. And that became sort of headlines. Obviously, you know, that when you think about, you know, what is not only tabloid fodder, but it was something that was sensational. And of course, every expert came to the microphone to say, yes, we have evidence. And of course, they had only done it on rats. But in any case, it was a real crisis for not only for Ericsson, but for Motorola and for Nokia. I'm sure names you don't hear anymore, but these three were the dominant manufacturers and distributors of mobile phones on the planet at that time. How quickly things change, right? And so we basically created the whole essence of this was coalitions. Basically, industry coalitions worldwide, coalitions with the other manufacturers, coalitions based on geography, coalitions based on scientific research that was being done by our individual companies. We enlisted 5 agencies worldwide. There were war rooms, there were news bureaus, there were 2 spokespersons per country. There were partnerships with universities to try to find the academic perspective on this. There were op-eds all over. There was tremendous amount of government relations because obviously regulatory entities were jumping on our backs to see whether indeed we were being irresponsible with consumer safety. And so on and on and on. It was such an elaborate and far-reaching. It was an extraordinary process. We were having meetings every few hours, and it was just a wealth of talent that came together. And when we're talking about engage your competitors, there was I don't think we could have overcome this at the time if we had not joined forces with the other manufacturers and competitors. So that was one. And then the other one, which is fairly recent, during my time as head of public relations for Univision Network, we had several crises that were more sort of talent scandal related, as you could imagine, but I can't talk about those. But there was one that made a lot of headlines in the English language and Spanish language media, which was about the soap opera that was made and produced and aired originally in Brazil, which was the story of Jesus, in a serialized episodic version, which made him very human. Well, evangelical Christian groups started to protest, and they protested very vocally, very loudly. They protested in front of stations in Miami, New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. They started a movement to boycott, for advertisers to boycott. It was extensive. Well, again, we engaged specialists and agencies and consultants, created basically war rooms in each of the major markets, enlisted our talent to come forward to talk about the fact that this is a dramatic representation of it's meant to be offensive to the parishioners and to those who go literally by the Bible. Anyway, it was highly engaged. It was multi-layered. It was something that lasted for a good 6 months until it softly, quietly. These things don't just close down. They don't just shut down and the door closes. It was a very gradual phasing out. But it was interesting because you were dealing with people's faith and you were dealing with very sensitive issues where everyone has, of course, a very, very passionate view on how, Jesus of Nazareth is being interpreted. And it's happened before with some feature films that have depicted Jesus in ways that necessarily go against some of the biblical teachings. So those are two examples. If anyone in the group wants to share anything that she has worked on or if you can, working on, I know Johnson & Johnson probably has many, but if there's any accounts that might help us in the process of, or in the spirit of sharing and learning from each other, this would be a good time to share. If not, we're going to go into our next section.
This is Charlotte. I'll do it shortly. When I work for a community service organization, the YMCA, and in building doing a building project, we found an unmarked cemetery. And luckily we were working with developers who, followed the law. They stopped digging. They called the police, reported it. Ended up, there was a community group that started as a protest, but all the players came together and decided to do the right thing, not the cheap thing, but the right thing. And so ultimately, actually, the collaboration we did between the developer, ourselves, and the community group, we won awards for how we approached the project. So that's how we went from what could have been horrible into ending up very good for us.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, I can share a very quick example if you like.
Yes, please, of course, yes.
Very, very quickly. This has actually happened in Venezuela a couple of years ago. We had notified customers of a small change in one of our service offerings, but in Venezuela, the established media is not very well developed now, and a lot of it is on social media, is how people consume their news. And the customer email was posted on Twitter, and within an hour, the news was rampant on Twitter in Venezuela that we had abandoned Venezuela, that we had just closed up shop and moved out, and nothing could be further from the truth. And while normally you might not go out and try to respond to just random comments on social media, because usually it doesn't work, in a few cases you have to. We kind of tried to see what we could do. We ended up doing some interviews, a couple of radio interviews to discuss that, you know, we had made a very small change in our service product offerings, given some changes that were taking place in the economy in Venezuela. And we actually also did a couple of posts on social media and worked with a couple of influencers who could then sort of repost our comments saying, you know, we're here to stay in Venezuela. We, you know, been here for over 30 years. And, but it was one of those situations where we kind of had to go against what you normally would do, which is, you know, let them talk on, let the chatter continue on Twitter. Sometimes it usually dies away. And in this case, we actually had to step up and say something because the government was also taking notice. And Venezuela may be an extreme situation, but you know, we didn't want the government to think that we actually were abandoning our operations there. That was critical to us.
High stakes there, very high stakes. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So let's talk about presence. Let's talk about you as the vessel, the messenger and the message. Presence, your presence as the communicator. Share. So basically, we've already discussed that it has to be authentic. It's the authentic communication that makes the human connection. And there is no line of work where speaking with authenticity won't help you. There's no line of work. And it extends to every aspect of your life. Any of us who are parents know that very well. You are, of course, then the messenger and the message. It's how you look, how you sound, how you move, how you make eye contact, how you project energy, how your mind is focused, where your attention is going. It's how you are listening. It's as important to speaking as any of the other, right? It's cyclical. It's output and then receiving. And we know, and more so now with social media and very short attention spans, you have 7 seconds to make a good impression. People will process and sort of etch in their minds an impression of you, an opinion, a judgment of you in the first 7 seconds. That's very well known in job hunting circles because you have to just basically nail it the minute you walk in the door. So, what are some of the elements of that presence? Vocal, it starts with your voice, and particularly, and I think, you know, these slides I created for a series of training presentations, this part about presence, way before COVID, right? In the fall of last year. And I was looking at them to see how I could repurpose them for today and say how the world has changed in just a few months because the voice is so critical to how we communicate in an online and a virtual setting, right? So we need to learn to love the sound of our voices. There's something many people struggle with. We have to learn to love the way we sound. And if we don't like the way we sound, we can improve on it. But again, the key, the fundamental, essential element is it has to be authentic. You're not going to sound like somebody you're not, of course. You have to consider your regionalisms and your accents. It's perfectly fine to speak with an accent that you have. Some of my clients, and I've been working one-on-one with executives from other countries, start by saying, well, how can I be a good public speaker if I have such a thick accent? And I said, no, it's part of who you are. Let's work with it. Let's harness it as part of your inventory of skills and talents. It's part of what makes you you. So why are we going to try to change it? It would be inauthentic to do otherwise. The rate of speech, you know, you want to speak within the range of 125 to 150 generally. And I'm a big offender in particularly I tend to speak too quickly. You want to slow down the rate of speech because, as we know, there are distortions in this platform where there's bandwidth issues, and then sometimes the sound doesn't necessarily match your movements. You want to pause, right? You want to use pauses for not only for emphasis, but for transition, for changing the subject. But there's nothing more powerful. There's nothing that puts your words in boldface underscore than a pause. Vocal variety. your pitch, the range, your volume. By pitch, I say, the down here and the I up here. I'm not very good at that, but there's some amazing vocal coaches, and there's a lot of instructional material on YouTube if you're interested. I can share some of that with you. Up talking, where you're the last word in a sentence or a phrase, your voice goes up, something very generational. And then the other thing that's very generational is, by generation, I mean generation Y, millennials, is vocal fry. So the voice goes into a gravelly place down here, and it's supposed to be more like casual, but it's that vocal fry or vocal growl that you might notice or might not have noticed, but I think that after today, you might start picking it up in other people. And proper breathing. You cannot make sounds unless you put air in your lungs and use your diaphragm. Proper breathing makes the world of difference in terms of how you project, not only with the energy that you come across, but your ability to hold a sentence and to not lose your breath halfway through. So anybody who's been an actor or singer knows that this is essential to doing those skills effectively. The same with public speaking. And not only public speaking, the same with what I'm doing here with you today and what you may be doing tomorrow with colleagues, clients, and other stakeholders. Let's talk a little bit about some of the most important, most prevalent gestures, body language. Amy Cuddy, who's a professor at Harvard, has perhaps one of the most viewed TED Talks ever, and it's about body language. She's a prolific writer as well, and she has a lot of wonderful research material about the nonverbal communication, what your body tells the world about you. So let's take a look at some of the most common gestures within the box that we're in. The same could apply for platform speaking skills if you're on a stage, if you're behind a lectern. But these gestures have become even more pronounced and important and essential, I'd say, in working with a virtual online platform like Zoom or many others. So the box, the box is the range within. It's above your waist and it goes up to your shoulders, actually your shoulder blades. And it's where your hand should never extend beyond that. It should stay within the confines of this imaginary box. Okay, it helps you sort of restrain your oversized gestures or your maybe tendency to flail your hands or to sort of go off frame, right? And it denotes sort of, if you stay within those confines, it does convey some measure of truthfulness and believability. So holding the ball is another one. You know, when you want to make a point, you sort of hold an imaginary ball. So it's like as if it was a basketball or a volleyball that size. And you're doing a commanding statement. Maybe it's something that you use for emphasis. You know, you have the facts at your fingertips. If you look at some of Steve Jobs' recordings of his Apple product launches, he used this gesture a lot. Let's look at another one. It's my favorite guy, Fauci. The pyramid hands. So it's what people do who don't know what to do with their hands. So it's like you're waiting to be asked a question, or you're waiting to be called on to speak, or you don't know what else to do with your hands. Usually when you're sitting, you have pyramid hands, and it just goes exactly like this. And I noticed when Dr. Fauci was doing the Senate hearings, that he had his hands in pyramid shape for most of his testimony, which I thought was interesting. So I wanted to capture that to see how it is in use by people who are very prominent in our news media today. It avoids the fidgety hands, but it also shows the confidence and the gravitas, certainly of a very worldwide renowned expert in his field. Let's take a look at another one. You know, I love the stance, and Amy Cuddy does a lot on this about standing shoulder with your hands. Your body is very firmly planted. Your shoulders are somewhat back, and you are standing with your legs spread, shoulder width distance, and you are firmly rooted. You're on the balls of your feet. You are ready for action. The statue of the fearless girl that's in, I don't know if she's still there, in Wall Street. is just that perfect pose, right? Of a young girl ready with confidence, brimming with zest for life, ready to do whatever her dreams inspire her to do. So it's a way forward. It's very important. When we tend to get frightened and nervous, we naturally will try to withdraw and shift our weight to our heels. Be aware of that. That's not in your favor. What's another one? Palms up. Oprah uses this a great deal. So it's like the honesty, accepting, I'm listening to you, I know how you feel, I'm with you. Okay, so it's another one that you'll see commonly. Palms down, conversely, is more a sign of authority, of saying, calm down, we'll get it together, we'll get through this, just stay calm and let's work together, right? So Barack Obama used to do this a great deal when he needed to quiet his audiences. You'll see parishioners, ministers and pastors, and do this with parishioners to get them to focus and pay attention, get them back in tune with him and what he or she's saying. What else? The smile. So important. Now there's different kinds of smiles, many different kinds of smiles. There is the very natural smile, which we're seeing here in Julia Roberts, which is called the Duchenne smile, because somebody a long time ago did a research project to see what the different types of smiles said. And the natural smile, it just wrinkles the whole, engages all the facial muscles, and it wrinkles the eyes. There's usually a telltale sign that this is a natural, spontaneous smile. On the other end of the spectrum is a Pan-American smile, which is one that is fake, is like if you were in the heyday of air travel, you would have this uniformed, very, very sort of robotic flight attendant greeting you, and that smile would be, oh, I'm so happy to see you. Please welcome you to Pan American Flight 101. It takes its name from that kind of customer dynamic and a little bit phony. Then you have another one. There's literally dozens, if not more than 100 types of smiles. George Bush was famous for his tight-lipped smirk, right? With the corners of his mouth going down, which says, I'm smug, I know everything. Or it can also denote, I'm not confident in what I'm doing. So again, watch your smile, watch how you come across. We have the perfect instrument. We have our iPhones where you can take a photo and see how you're smiling. And be more aware of that. It says a lot about you. Eye contact changes every communication. Has to be two-way. You have to look at people in the eye. One thing that this platform of Zoom makes even more difficult, I guess uncomfortable, not difficult, is that we're looking at each other nonstop. Like I can't really look over here because then you're saying, where does she go? I'm looking at the lens because I'm looking at your eyes, and the lens is virtually your eye, one of your eyes, to me. So similarly, you're looking at me through the eye. Hopefully, when we connect, you're looking at the eye of the webcam. So it has to be two-way. Some people feel uncomfortable. They feel like they're staring. It doesn't have to be this sort of magnet glued to the other person, but everyone knows when good eye contact is being made. You feel it. You feel it because it's sincere. You feel the person's really interested in what you have to say, really interested in making a connection with you. So connect with people in different parts of the room is what I would teach people who are working in a theater or an auditorium setting. You want to connect with different people who are looking at you on a stage or a platform throughout the duration of your presentation. So these are, in summary, some of the 7 secrets of body language. I'm going to get into color in a moment, but I'm going to take a pause here and ask if there was something that resonated for you in that content.
So Rosemary, this is Clara. I have a couple of questions, and the 2 things that resonate with me, I think, are both the appropriate use of voice and how to, that is something that I have certainly become more sensitized in working in this environment. And most of my teams are international. So I'm speaking to people that are physically located in different places, but also it's a mixture of like accents and different languages. And so I'd love to hear more from a practical standpoint, how to get the voice ready for that interaction and practical things that I can do to it. And I think the second part of that question is, I tend to use more gestures in I think in an in-person interaction, but I've really struggled with the amount of gestures and what to worry about in the body language now that I'm doing it online. And so before I used to put a little focus in my standing position and make sure that I'm a walker if I'm presenting, so moving too much. And I think now that's, especially when I'm trying to, in my setting, a lot of times I'm counseling and providing course of action to move in different situations. And I also happen to be often the youngest person in that team. So I'm balancing this idea of conveying and developing gravitas through this medium that is unfamiliar. So that I'd love to hear maybe your thoughts on that.
I'm going to answer, but I invite the others to weigh in as well. This is still a very new, you'll hear a voice in a moment. My dog is barking outside my door. I don't know what he wants, but I'm going to ignore him. So that's the other voice you might hear. The confines of this rectangle they're confines, but there's also an opportunity. It depends so much on the speed, the quality of the connection, because you don't want to be gesturing and then have it blur. I don't know if I'm coming across blurred to you, but if I make a lot of gestures, see, it doesn't hold up. You'll see yoga instructors, Pilates instructors, they're doing fairly well, but that's not where we're going. You can use the upper body. You can also stand, and you can have the webcam at a distance so that you could stand and have more of your body showing, particularly if you're maybe pointing to something, or you're using some kind of aids, presentation aids that are there with you. If it's a product, let's say. Some people have mastered doing almost like a dry erase board, where you're on one side and then you're pointing to something here, where you're actually interacting with a surface where you have written information that you can use as another slide, as another content platform. So you can go that. You can use non-virtual material. Or some people actually interact with what's on the screen. Some platforms allow you to do a little inset, so that, let's say in this dark space here, I would have an image and I could relate to that. I think Microsoft Teams has that, if I'm not mistaken. So think that with your iPhone, play around with what's available, what can you incorporate your work, practice it as much, be comfortable with it, because it takes time to navigate in what I call in the rectangle. But generally, you don't want to make too many gestures, because you don't know what the receiving end is seeing you blurred or seeing you crisply in HD, right? And the quality, make it authentic, make it your own, create as much as possible so that you have your voice not strained.
Great.
Anyone else want to weigh in? Mm-hmm.
This is Charlotte. On that subject of hand gestures, I find that in broadcast media, when you're being interviewed, it's very distracting. It's like 3D. And so when I'm with somebody who's doing an interview for us, and when they do a break, I'll go over and say, you don't want to, and they also rock, those kinds of things. The planting the feet, don't do the hand gestures unless they're really far back, but if they're there, all it is, it's just this weird thing on camera.
Yeah, well, obviously in a broadcast setting, what we have been trained to do, obviously it's different. You want more of a gesture, of an acknowledgement of, but it's a different medium now, now that we're living in Zoomville. Wonderful.
One of the things I wanted to add was people often have natural rhythms of gesturing that our mutual friend, Rosemary and mine, Akeem Nowak, talks about beat gestures. And if you ever record something that you're presenting, it's a good idea to do it. And notice, without thinking too naturally, about what will my gestures be. Notice what your natural tendencies are with using your hands. So for me, I know I will sometimes gesture a lot. It's okay to have some, but too many beat gestures, just as Rosemary said, can blur, or it just looks like too much. In which case, then the whole pyramid hands, or what Akeem would call just your resting place, it's okay to gesture a little bit for, visual variety, but then, bring the energy back down. So that's just something to be aware of.
Terrific. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you. Let's work quickly through color. And I'm so glad that we're, as women, I think we can probably relate to this better than if it was a mixed audience. But this could be its own presentation, and this fascinates me. But just very quickly, colors have meaning, and they denote different types of personality traits and different kind of energy. And it's important to be aware that not only do they convey certain attributes about you, and they can either complement or deter from your effectiveness as a communicator, but there's skin tone, there's hair color, eye color, all these things that combine with, in other words, the right harmony of color is something that I'm sure many of us know, because we're professional women and we've done this before. But take a look at how colors are distorted in the new rectangle. It's important to see that. I like to look at what works and what doesn't. I've been noticing Steve Jobs, for example, loves pink. When he was on recently, he was doing a media blitz regarding his recommendations on the pandemic, and he showed up in his pink sweater, which denotes sort of a naive, approachable personality, compassionate, which I thought was interesting because he comes across as wimpy. So you could see some of these traits, seeks peer acceptance, but he's witty and smart. So that we know for sure. Now, Jobs, for example, is famously dressed in black, and that is the luxury, the elegance, the sophisticated, moody, right? Likes control and power, and is emotionally insecure. And we know that from reading many of his biographies. And white is simplicity, self-reliant, right? Logical. But an old soul is considered sort of an old color choice. Hillary used it effectively here. And gray is that suggests, I use gray a great deal, detachment and fence-sitter, neutral. But it's solid and stable. Obviously, it's used in the legal field and banking a great deal. Now, these colors that I just shared with you show up well online through a webcam. There's others that don't. Here's some examples of those colors that do show up well, although this blue, this cobalt blue sometimes shows up as black. Oprah, of course, is wearing a fuchsia, which is the color I chose today. And then red, this kind of blood red, shows up well too. Nancy Pelosi dresses very well for the camera, and if you've noticed, she wears predominantly solid colors. And so these are all solid colors. Avoid patterns, avoid florals, avoid a lot of jewelry. As you can see, those decisions in terms of accessorizing have been shown by these 4 women. Bad choices. A moire pattern. You sometimes see this on the neckties of newscasters, where they just picked a bad tie that day, which is like, it becomes like really like psychedelic kind of thing, or very thin stripes, or very busy prints, or in the case of this poor woman, she's doing a stand-up, a field story about jails, and she's wearing clothing that could be well associated with jails. I don't think she thought about it a lot when she left the house that morning. So I'm sure you've seen them, but again, polka dots is another one that does not do very well. So in essence, we have a new reality, right? So we are dressing from the waist up. And but if you choose to use more of your body in presentations, you should consider the other half of your body, right? Certainly your slacks, your skirt. because it may show up even a little bit if you have a wide shot. With that, I'm going to talk about mindset. I'm sorry, let me open it up again. Any comments about what I just shared? Okay, let's move on to mindset. So this is what's between your ears, right? Your outlook, which is essential. All of these are essential. I don't think you can be successful one without the other, right? So taking a look at what does that mean? That usually applies to what we all perceive as being fear of public speaking. And there is an actual psychological term that is called glossophobia. And it is social and performance anxiety. Okay, so there is just like claustrophobia, agoraphobia, it's called glossophobia. And is usually associated with stage fright. But it is used also for purposes of public speakers who can't, who just basically want to die before they go on the stage, and we know, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that people tend to sense. So how does the fear of public speaking rank actually in terms of the higher human fear? It's actually number 5. And I think there's somebody made this myth about, that public speaking is the number 1 fear of human beings, which in truth is our extinction, our death, right? Followed by being mutilated, by being eaten by a tiger or mauled by an alligator. Then followed by the loss of autonomy, being in prison, being bodily restricted in some way, through some kind of a disability or through imprisonment, separation, abandonment, rejection is another one, a divorce, loss of a job. And then, of course, the last one is the fear of being humiliated and shamed by failing as a public speaker. And this all comes from research by a Dr. Albrecht. And this is fairly recent. It's 2007. So how do we deal with this? Of course, our adrenal glands go crazy, our neck and back tense up, hands shake, legs shake, you sweat, blood pressure goes up, your digestion shuts down, which is why you typically should not eat a big meal before you do a public engagement. You get dry mouth and you get butterflies in your stomach. And these two gentlemen, the Beatles, were famous about stage fright. It's reported that they would throw up before just about every performance. So how to overcome stage fright? Okay, so what are the most important things besides what, there's some gimmicky things that people do, and Elaine's going to be talking a lot about this, but you turn the fear into energy, right? What I call training the butterflies to fly in formation. And the butterflies in your stomach, they're not going to go away. Just train them to fly in formation. You have to prepare early, rehearse, prepare, rehearse. There's no substitution for being prepared. Record yourself, check yourself out, make modifications when you do the playback. Hydrate, drink a lot of fluids. Know your equipment. Know if you're there in a physical, in physical form. Know the room. Know the equipment. Know your technology. Warm up the people in the room. We did the welcome on the waiting room on this Zoom call. Similarly, if you're there in person, you can greet people as they're waiting for your presentation to begin, and so that you develop a rapport with people and know their names. You smile, because that is probably the most effective way to change brain chemistry in you and in the receiver of your smile. You visualize your success, you keep it very much in your brain, and you visualize that moment of joy that you're going to feel when you finish successfully your presentation. And you breathe, you meditate, you slow down. And well, Elaine's going to take us through some more of this process. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Elaine Nieberding, who is joining us for the first time. She's going to tell us about how to change the molecules in the room and how to really work on your mindset and how to quiet your mind so that you can listen. Elaine is a wellness educator. She's a live streaming broadcaster, transformational coach, and a board certified holistic registered nurse. Since 1997, she's been guiding leaders, individuals, and groups to drop their resistances to being helpful, healing presences in the world. She'll share some of her powerful processes drawn from experience. They come from oncology, from integrative coaching, from master energy practice, and a laughter yoga teacher. She uses the theme of TLC throughout her work, and that means trust, lead, and connect. And with that, I'm going to share the screen with Elaine, and I'm going to excuse myself because I'm going to see what my dog is trying to tell me while I give the floor to Elaine Nieberding. Welcome, Elaine.
I'm coming off mute, and Rosemary's going on mute so that we can focus in together and make a good connection. Now, how many of you, when you think of TLC, think of tender loving care? Raise your hand. How many of you think of the TLC channel with shows such as one of my favorites, Say Yes to the Dress? Well, it's our time whenever we are addressing another person, another group, to know what place we're coming from when we're communicating. And I loved hearing Rosemary talk about falling in love with your voice. Actually, you need to fall in love and come into that acceptance place about everything about you. We certainly know that some visionary leaders actually make impact by revealing their vulnerability, including some of their stories, occasionally even reaching a tiny emotional touch point. And as they do that, they look very human and are able to connect. So once again, this is about TLC today is about trust, lead, and connect. And I'm going to focus on trust, first of all. So from 2006 through the end of 2013, I was working as a bedside nurse. Now, and primarily in oncology, which is cancer care. People are in the hospital with their first round of cancer or a return of cancer, face a lot of issues about looking at what's going on and trying to understand, how do I relate? Do I buy the diagnosis? Am I comfortable with the treatment plan? How do I feel about death? How do I feel about relationships and things that are moving along in my life? So while they're in the hospital, they're in very vulnerable places. This is where the nurse comes in. Nurses are known to be, and our surveys show, nurses are actually the most trusted profession. So I joined the nursing profession actually after age 50 and worked in that arena for about 9 years. And a couple years into the process, I actually took training to take my proclivities for holistic practices and approaches to bring that into my nursing practice. And I learned something about being in, this is kind of a mouthful, transpersonal caring relationship with a patient. This was part of a nursing approach by a nurse visionary named Jean Watson. And what she guided us to do, to adopt, was a practice where every time on a very, very busy workday, where you might have, let's say, 5 patients, and you're constantly going back, interfacing between different patients, interfacing with your tech who assists you, interfacing with doctors, interfacing with the constant change of new orders for patients. But whenever it was time to get back to go into a patient's room, what we were guided to do was pause, oh so briefly, and remember the breath of life that sustains me. In other words, the core of me, the life force in me, is the same as the life force within the patient. And on the outside, I can have a role, I can have health that looks a particular way, and the patient can have all these variables on the outside that I will be tending to. But if I remember the core of them is the same as the core of me, there actually is an energetic connection that happens. So as I walk through the door, I am most likely to be operating from the full range of my human capacities for knowing and sensing and communicating. Let's say just operating from a more intuitive place. And I love the word intuitive because to me it means connecting with your inner teacher or your deepest place of core values. That served me well. And for me as a nurse, early in my life, in my working nursing life, I began this practice of oh so quickly pausing to make an energetic connection and connect back to my deepest sense of value, which was to be helpful and purposeful. And so as leaders, every day when we start the day, or particularly when we're about to give an address, especially if it's a sensitive topic, if there's a crisis going on, we absolutely have to pause. And if there's that fright thing going on, we absolutely have to pause and recenter. I have come to know when I look at the range of human fears that help disconnect us from other people and from being effective, our fears or our sense of lack kind of falls into three categories. We either feel like we're lacking control, we're lacking a sense of safety, or we're lacking a sense of approval. We want all of those things. And to flip around any sense of either mental distraction, disturbance, or a bodily sensation of fear, I won't be good enough, it just takes that intention. Oh, let me dare to claim I have safety, I have control, and I have approval. And it really starts on the inside. So this is what we're really tasked to do as leaders. If we want to be setting the good example, then we have to up our own self-care and weave into our day these little micro bursts of readjustment whenever we notice that we are being negative, sour, or reactive. And with all of the uptick in interest in mindfulness practices and self-care, wellness in the workplace, and particularly all the breathing and meditative practices that are around, I would say many visionary leaders are better positioned to be better communicators and connectors because they do connect with that inside place. So what are we going to do to make those moments of communication fully connective and impactful? Well, I'm going to share with you what I'll call, 3 ways to do this TLC. TLC, where you're going to be doing tender, loving, caring for yourself by doing the self-care. You are going to up-level your capacity to trust on the inside, and be present with your presence so those you're with are more likely to trust you. And again, make a connection. But once again, if you've been wise enough to notice when you're getting slightly off kilter, you're nervous, you're fearful, or you just notice a tenseness, you do you must make the correction. Those are both mindset and they're energetic things. So we're going to explore three of them. Now, many of us, when we're working on our computer screens, we're going through the day, maybe we have many tabs open on our computer. What happens? Performance slows down. You lose track of things. The responsiveness in your computer, it slows down. And sometimes you notice you have to close some of those tabs, or you have to refresh your browser. I hope today that every time you open your computer and notice the little refresh icon, that will be a reminder to you that often during the day, you will take the pause that refreshes and you will breathe. So just take a moment with me now to just close your eyes and just notice your own breathing at whatever rhythm it is. And then gently go a little deeper. Because every time you take 10 seconds or 15 seconds or 30 seconds, it's not just that your breathing is tripping your nervous system into the parasympathetic, the relaxation mode, but you're actually getting more oxygen. And oxygen actually refreshes us. You know, most of the time we're walking around with shallow breathing, only using about the top quarter of our lung capacity. And if there's any blessing to come out of COVID-19, it should be that we need to appreciate the fullness of our lungs and more frequently breathe in to the top of the lungs, down to the diaphragm, and even way down into the back lower lobes. So that's the first thing. And just raise your hand for me if pausing to do that breathing is something that it occurs to you to do, or that you've noticed is valuable even as part of self-care, meditation, or a self-care practice. Any of you? Great. Now the next one, I'll call this a reboot. A couple years ago, I came across a book by Andrew Newberg and a Mark David Waldman. One of them is a physician. I'm forgetting who. But the book was called God Changes the Brain. It's a very interesting book about connecting with inner teacher, a sense of, you know, the greater mystery that we live in. For some reason, there was a chapter in the book about yawning. And research was revealed that a yawn is absolutely the quickest reboot of your parasympathetic nervous system. Now, interestingly, I came across about a year ago when I was doing a Toastmasters speech, a website by a speaker, a well-known speaker trainer named Marjorie Saulson, and it was absolutely in one of her tips for speaking preparation. She would say, yes, yawn. So my encouragement to all of you, before you're going to do any kind of presentation, if you don't have much time at all, do a yawn. Don't be afraid to cover your face so it doesn't look so strange, perhaps. Don't smother your mouth, but let yourself naturally yawn. Now, I find when I even mention the word yawning, I start to yawn. but now I'm going to do it intentionally. And let the mirror neurons of your body, as you watch me yawn, let it trigger your own yawn. I want you to yawn with me. Okay, maybe that wasn't so pretty. So now we'll just do it kind of the polite way. We'll just so what's happening when you're yawning? You're actually getting a big dose of oxygen. You are triggering the things in the vagus nerve and these different parts of your nervous system that trip you into relaxation. So don't be so worried that people think you're bored. It's actually enriching to you when you give yourself permission to yawn, and especially before you're going to do a presentation or speech. It helps you relax. Now, the third one that I'm going to mention, let me find the right thing here. This one I called the eraser method. There is something wonderful about beginning to communicate when you're completely fresh and clear. Maybe some of you have even heard from time to time, whenever you're starting a new activity, start from beginner's mind, without all your preconceptions. Similarly, when you're going out to do a speaking presentation, you know, if your mind is pulling something from the past into the now, like when you think you did not do a good job speaking, or when you're projecting some of your own fears about yourself onto your audience, your employers, your supervisors, your team, your board, whoever it happens to be, it's not helpful. So this idea of using an eraser to clear, I'm going to link it to your breath. And I invite you now to just pretend that your stress level is like at a 6 or 7 out of 10. You know you have to be talking with someone to deliver a message of importance. And yet you have to ground in your truth, whether it's going to be a strong directive you have to give, or unusual news, or whatever it happens to be. If you can clear yourself of your preconceptions and projecting your fears into the future, energetically, you will actually set yourself up, just in the same way I mentioned as the nurse walking into the room, thinking about the people, what's the same about them that's the same about you? Their ability to breathe and have a life force. So take a moment now, close your eyes with me, and just imagine you're, kind of a little frantic, but you have to speak. And what you're cued to do is start, first of all, bring your attention to your breathing. Notice its own rhythm and its own depth. And give yourself permission to, once again, just enjoy that feeling of the air going in and out. And then imagine, placed into your dominant hand is an eraser. And for all of any remaining tension that you have, or resistances that bubble up as an intruding thought, or the voice of the inner critic, use your powerful right hand as an eraser as you continue breathing. And just know you have the power, with your intention, to just erase it. Get back into your center your point of clarity. You're back at the blank slate, the beginner mind. You're fresh in the moment, in the now. And if you only have a few bullet points that you have to make, by clearing in advance, you will make a connection at an energetic level and not just at a content level. I'd like to now just invite each of you to open your eyes. And I'd like for you to unmute yourself. And I'd love to get some feedback from anyone about any of those three things that I suggested. The refresh, that was the first one. The second was reboot with a yawn. And the third was the eraser. Anyone?
I love the experience. I'm really feeling rebooted now. Right now, I'm feeling like I can start my day, and it was amazing. Thanks, Elaine. And I never heard about the young experience before, but it makes total sense, and we feel better. And it's amazing how the oxygen just reboot the body, and also the eraser. I love it. I was feeling like lighter, thinking about like my next presentation, my next workshop, what I'm going to do next. And I was thinking about that time, like 10 minutes before, when we have this high level of adrenaline. And so I probably going to start practicing the eraser because it's really, really helpful. Thank you.
Anna.
I really liked the way that you kind of gave it a little word and then connected it with an action, because it's an easy takeaway to kind of put in your back pocket for when you are in those situations where you're going to do something like this. Personally, my tendency is not to do something like this, so it's something that I'm definitely going to try. What I would do is go more the avenue of, is it Amy Cuddy? And doing more of the power posing, dancing, you know, like loosening myself up to feel ready to do all the gestures and deliver a speech or a presentation. So in the moment where we just did this, I kind of felt more relaxed. Not to say that doing the other things I don't, because that's how I loosen myself up with my energy. But I liked it. It's pretty neat.
Anyone else? Rosemary, you're muted.
I used the exercise to come back to center because I was so concerned that my dog, whose name is Chucho, has never interrupted me ever. But what's happening is that there is a thunderstorm outside, and so he's afraid of the thunder. And so I had the door closed, and he wanted to come in the room with me. So he's right under my feet right now, which is where he wanted to be, to feel safe. So I might introduce him at the end. He can make a sort of a little grand appearance at the end. But I said, this is just natural. This is the world we're in. These are the situations that we have to deal with. And we've seen many people who have children running around in the background. That's just life. That's just life. It doesn't take anything away from you, because again, as long as you're making the connection, that's all that matters, and you're being authentic.
The last thing I want to close with is remembering what you said, Rosemary, about visualizing in advance. If you could choose how you would be feeling at the end, or maybe how at least some of your audience would be feeling at the end. You know, if someone came up to you and said, that was so awesome. I came into this meeting dreading X, Y, and Z, and I've been flipped around, and what you had to say was so important, so impactful. And this is just wordplay. I love wordplay stuff. Awesome. The word awesome has me and we in it. And so awesomeness happens when we're making a connection. It's me working and communicating at my leading edge, but it's for a we experience. It's for a collective effort. It's for the alignment with the vision and mission of the group, the task, the organization, and I hope this little wordplay is helpful for you. Thank you.
Thank you. What a wonderful exercise. Thank you. And did you want to mention that you have an offer? You're open to receiving requests?
Yeah, leadwithTLC@gmail.com is my email address. And I would love to have any of you connect with me for just a complimentary experience, just of what inner inquiry processes, how they can be so helpful for connecting with your inner teacher. I'd just be happy to have you have an experience so you know what is out there in the world of assistance and coaching, and how some of these guided processes can be very helpful for empowering each individual person. Thank you.
Well, I have a slide at the end. Thank you. I have a slide at the end with all of our contact information, including Elaine's, but I wanted her to share that with you. And I too am the beneficiary of her guidance, guided meditations. Extremely, extremely valuable. We are, and this is one of the few times when I am actually running over time, but I want to be respectful of our hard stop at 6. And I'm going to fast forward through the content remaining. And but what's very important is I'm going to skip the presentation part because we won't have enough time for that. I will be sending you material afterwards that will be supportive of the key learnings for all of what we talked about. But I want to share the storytelling part, because I think we would be incomplete without talking about storytelling, right? Because this is the story, this is the thread that ties it all together, right? It's the story that helps navigate the world, right? When we're children, we're prepared history rhymes, right? And children's stories, they help us to know how to tie our shoelaces and how to get on the bus for school and countless other life skills. And it also teaches us how to listen, right? It trains our ears to listen. And there's a wonderful Native American proverb that says, those who tell the stories rule the world, right? And similarly, there's those who say that those who write the history are the ones that rule the world. But the stories are the underpinnings of historical documentation. And when we look at the I just realized I'm not doing the slide show, but you're seeing the screen, right? You seeing my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Oh boy. It's exactly what I didn't want to happen. Let me stop sharing. I hate when that happens. Let me go right to the part where I need to share. Okay, so here we go. I'm having a moment, Elaine. It's not allowing me to do what I want to do.
We're all sending you good juju here.
I want to jump right to storytelling. Here's storytelling, and I want to go to slideshow. There we go. Okay, now to share. But are you seeing what I'm seeing? No, you're not, right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Get in screen share mode, my dear.
I know. Darn. Screen share mode. Here we go. I have to practice. Share screen. This one. Yes. Share screen. Share. Now I'm going to go to, yes, slideshow. Aha. Okay. Sorry. So the next slide is, the cavemen. The cavemen were telling the stories through pictographs on the walls of caves, right? So this is as long as there have been human beings on Earth, we have been telling stories, right? I want to encourage you, this is a really abbreviated session. Storytelling can be actually a full day workshop. And if you have the time to do that, I can recommend a number of master storytellers who coach particularly for business storytelling. Dave Bricker being one of them, who you met at the top of our time together. So I encourage you to make an inventory of stories. I too, when I first started doing a lot of public speaking, I said, I don't have stories. I can't think of a story. I'm not funny. I don't have any really crazy relatives. And so, but that's not the case. Everybody has stories. If you're alive, you have a story. If you breathe, you have a story. So it's about starting to document. Maybe it's in a file, maybe it's through photos, maybe it's just through clippings, through scrapbooking. To start to record and collect those important times in your life. You're crazy. You're either crazy or very very square and boring relatives. Your authority figures, your peers, right? Your coworkers. Your enemies or heroes, because stories need to have drama. They need to have a hero, somebody who saves the day, right? They have to have a villain, a counterforce, a yin and yang, a good and bad, right? There has to be a drama. There has to be an arc of transformation. Things that you cherish, things that are important in that little treasure chest, maybe your first locket, maybe your first hair beret, things that have hurt you, memories of maybe a cat that scratched you. And of course, photos and video clips are wonderful ways to jog your memory. And let's look for the common denominator, right? The stories that convey universal experience, right? That help us to care. Who doesn't remember the first kiss, right? Who doesn't remember that tender moment when you were experimenting with boys or with an affectionate other? And started to feel a sense of attraction to other children. Those are very, very special moments. So I wanted to do, and unfortunately we don't have time, but I'm going to send this exercise to you because this is the story of me is something that you know. You know your story better than anybody else. And these are some of the elements. I would call this an elevator pitch. It should be no more than 60 seconds. And it basically has certain elements, and I'm going to model it for you in a moment. But basically, this is your time to say, what do you stand for? What are your values? What are some of the things you've overcome? What is triumph or a failure? What is a dramatic emotional time for you? What has been a transformative stage in your life or an experience? Maybe it's something related to a job that you did or something in your personal life or sports pursuits, artistic interests. Something, but it has to be memorable and sticky, right? It has to be relatable, people that other people can relate to it. And if I go fishing and I'm telling a fishing story, many people might not relate to what fishing is about. So make it relatable to your audience. It can be sad or funny, but make it pull on the heartstrings in some way. Usually a lesson learned that gives a moral to the story, a natural closing is very effective. And make it truthful. Don't make it up. Make it truthful. Before I tell my story, I want to share something that I heard in a seminar the other day. And I happen to have my prop. And it's a story of WD-40 oil. Right here. and the, I'll stop sharing for a moment. And the story goes that, and it's particularly relevant, I wanted to share it today because today supposedly, and I haven't seen the news, the SpaceX spaceship took off today from Cape Canaveral. I don't know if it was successful. There were issues with the weather, but I don't know if it actually succeeded in taking off. Well, so I heard the story about WD-40 and I'm saying, why would I be interested in WD-40? Well, it's a story of overcoming challenges, of being perpetual failures and finally landing on a product. And it's WD-40, and it actually stands for Water Displacement 40th Attempt. So they were these guys in San Diego who were just tinkerers, and they were playing with this chemical stuff that they wanted to sell to the people who were making the rocket ships. This was in the early 50s when the space program was just beginning. So they were playing around in their garages with different chemical formulas so they could sell to the space builders, to the space rocket builders. I think it was called it was the Atlas missile. Something to coat the outside of the vessel so that it would glide through the air, through the atmosphere really, really well. So, but it had to have certain characteristics. Well, they kept trying and they kept trying, and they finally found the right formula, and it was WD-40. And they sold it to the rocket company that was based in San Diego for $500. The formula. They kept the rights to the formula, and then they decided about 10 years later to turn it into an all-purpose lubricant for household use. So you can look up in Wikipedia the names of the individuals. It's an interesting story because it's a product that most of us have. It's not a sexy product. It's not a pretty product, but it's a very useful product. And when you say, oh, how interesting. Now I know what it means. And it means perseverance, it means tenacity, it means innovation, it means a product that helped make the space program happen, that make, so all these little elements make for an interesting story. It's not my story, but it's a truthful story. And like that, there's many, many, many stories all over. So in closing, I just wanted to leave you with, let me go back to the share screen on this. The story of me, and I urge you to practice it on your own. And the structure goes like this. When I was a child, when I was in my first job, when I was newly married, or when I ran my first marathon, there was a transformation. Something happened that makes me believe that this is something that's really important. And then you end with, my name is blank, and I do this, which is a byproduct of the experience that transformed you. Let me give you an example. This is mine. My family fled Castro's Cuba when I was 8. I didn't know a word of English, so learning a new language and speaking without stuttering became key to my survival. Fresh out of college, I challenged myself to become fully bilingual and a communicator. I got a voice coach and practiced public speaking in Latin America and throughout the US. I became a sought-after spokesperson for major brands. I believe that public speaking can change your life. I believe that there's a natural storyteller in each of us, and that with the right coach, anyone can achieve her fullest potential at the podium. My name is Rosemary Ravinal, and I help bilingual C-suite executives master high-stakes presentations and speeches. You get the gist? So I'm working my values, my journey, my challenges, overcoming childhood stuttering, into what drove me, in large measure, into my chosen profession, and how then I took the stepping stones of building a career and then transformed it into being a coach. So we all have those stories. No one here can tell me otherwise. I would love to, and because of the sake of time, I wanted you to do it in breakout rooms, and I apologize for, this session has been so interactive that it ran over time. But I want to invite you to connect with me, as you will be connecting with Elaine. Share your story of me. You can record it and send it to me. You can write it and then call me, email me. I would love to spend some 15 minutes to half an hour with you to go over any of the content that we shared here, because it was very rich in content. And I think that as you think about what we discussed today, you may have a lot more questions. I'm going to share the screen one more time because I want to close with our information. Here is our contact information, my email, my website, my mobile number, Elaine's as well. We invite you, Elaine, if I may speak for you as well, to continue this dialogue, which to me has been extremely valuable. I love to share this. I love to do this because I learned so much from you, and I hope you've learned something from me. And this circular communication is to me essential, and it just brings my career sort of to a pinnacle of feeling, you know, that I have things to share and that people can benefit from my knowledge. So I thank you for your attention. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions if there's a burning question. And I am so, so grateful that we had this time together. Any last thoughts? I'd love for you to do a poll, if you don't mind. It's anonymous, and it just basically asks you for impressions on the 2 hours of boot camp. Again, this is I'm going to have 2 more after this one, every 2 Wednesdays, and then there will be a curriculum for a master class. And I will be sure that you're on the list for that information as we're getting ready to launch it. Are there any last questions?
I was just going to make a comment on, I was at a national meeting and Dr. Phil was the speaker. And he unfortunately started out with jokes that were like jokes about men. Not knowing that the entire audience had training in how to not respond to sexist jokes or racist jokes or those kinds of things. So it went dead in a room of 5,000 people. And luckily he quickly switched and left that behind and went on to his topic. But I thought that was a very memorable of a very professional speaker that tried something with an audience, immediately saw no response and switched into a different methodology.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone who is famous is good at public speaking, right? Right. They're, you know, just he's good at maybe doing television counseling, maybe being a panelist. He's written many books. Maybe he's better in another medium, but to hold the audience attention for a 20-minute, half an hour keynote is difficult to do. Mm-hmm. So there's different iterations of this, but usually starting with a joke is not the best idea because not everyone has the same humor meter, right? And there's cultural elements that, you know, and then gender elements. So you don't go into a minefield unless you're being paid to do a humorous speech, and that's something else.
Which he was not.
I want to pipe up with one last little comment. Even though it only came up quickly, the slide that you had with inventory of personal stories, mm-hmm. That's good. You know, there are a variety of ways to go about jogging your memory for stories. In coaching work that I do, sometimes I'll work with a client, we'll do a timeline and see what stories want to emerge. But I like framing it this way. It's another way of approaching it. And sometimes just seeing the word, it's like the story just pops up. So I was appreciative for that. And also, I loved seeing the contrast in crisis management and communications in Zoom as opposed to BP. That was impactful. Yeah. So I'm curious in these last few moments to see if anybody else has a point that really landed for them.
I can share, I can share some struggle from my part. I always find it hard to talk about myself. Mm-hmm. I love what I do. I love my work, but having like personal stories, I always feel like that's too much. I'm just telling myself too much. I don't wanna do that, but people connect with stories. So it's very important. And I love this structure, like the way you teach it, like how to structure the story. I love it. And I think it connects to anyone easily. It's not like salesy, and thanks for that. Very, very helpful.
Thank you. It shouldn't be complicated. It shouldn't be complicated. It should be, again, the